Hi, it's Parm King, the Dungeon Master for Legends of Barovia, a Curse of Strahd campaign. And today I'm going to talk about the elusive NPC that should be in your game. Before I do, please click subscribe, hit the bell icon so you can be updated when I make another, perhaps valuable DM tip for you. So, the elusive NPC, what is it? How should we incorporate it in the game? Why should we do it? And how can we do that within Foundry? Well, most of the adventures that we all play as Dungeon Masters start at a point A, and our characters in our party go to point B. That's the quest, the adventure. Point A is most likely, usually, a tavern in some town where our players meet for the first time. They learn about a quest. Perhaps they roam around the town a little bit, maybe some side quests, get the items that they need, some information they need, and then they travel to point B, the location. It could be a dungeon crawl, a castle, ruins, or some boss fight in the monsters, or going to another plane. But between point A and point B, there's traveling, there's distance. And sometimes we're just frustrated. We just go, okay, you travel 2 weeks and you're there. And that's kind of cheating the players and cheating yourself. And I created an entire video, which I'll link down below, called Creating Exciting Encounters, Random Encounters for Yourself. But there is something else missing in your campaign, and that is the elusive NPC. Now, you might be wondering, why doesn't Wizard of the Coast incorporate these elusive NPCs? Well, I would argue that they don't, because really it's up to you to determine what's needed for your players to succeed in their quest. Now, as a dungeon master, we all dungeon masters hate to railroad our characters to help them on their quest and force them down a particular path. Nobody wants to do that, and we shouldn't do that. We should give the players the decision-making power and free will that makes this game so exciting. But you're going to run into problems, just like we all do, where your players get lost. They're having problems finding information for the quest, or not able to get the particular magic item that they need, or perhaps they need some healing. And this is where the elusive NPC comes in. Now, I've created two elusive NPCs that I'm using in my campaign. I'm going to show you them in Foundry, what they do, why I use them. Now, the first one I have here is the elusive NPC, the Old Druid Hermit. Now, I have a Theater of the Mind map, which I have here. I got a little fog, some little stars twinkling. We have one of our characters there, and there he is on the map. Now, I'm going to always use Theater of the Mind map for my elusive NPCs, because this is not going to be about combat or exploration. This is really about role-playing. Now, the Druid NPC is an interesting NPC because he provides several things. Number one, the Druid can provide some healing. Let's say your players need some healing. They're maybe short a healer. They don't have a cleric in their party. The Druid can provide some healing. Number two, the Druid can provide some really interesting lore and information about the creatures, the beasts, and nature around. Perhaps there's a secret Druid circle nearby or some ruins. Number three, the Druid can provide some magic items. Perhaps he can be a trader or barter for a handful of things. Number four, he can be a quest giver. Maybe there's a side quest that you want to give your party that weaves into the main quest. Or perhaps your party's just getting bored and they want to go somewhere different, and you can have your Druid have a couple of quests. In fact, you could even come up with a random quest table for your Druid to give your characters. The Druid is a great character to introduce just for those four reasons anywhere along that path in which your players are traveling. This is the character that I've created here. His name is Celeborn. He lives in the forest. This is his little house. And at some point, my characters may or may not run into him, and he may or may not provide information they need to be successful in their quest. This is my elusive Druid character. Now let's go on to see my other elusive NPC. My other elusive NPC is the Old Wise Mage. The Old Wise Mage lives in that house on the far corner of the edge of town. He's most likely a wizard. The lore that he knows is completely different than the Druid. The wizard knows more about history, ancient buildings, characters, and myths. So the lore is different. It's not nature and beasts, it's more history and characters and famous legendary people. He also is probably going to be able to have different types of spells. He can also send you on some quests, And perhaps he can even cast a spell on one of your items and give it some radiant damage or other some kind of magical powers. He could perhaps ask you to go do something on his behalf in order for him to grant you the spell that you need. He's a little bit different character, and he's going to be in a different location. Perhaps he's in the old house on the outside of town, or some ancient ruins in which you find this Old Wise Mage. Now, if you're familiar with Curse of Strahd and the village of Barovia, and I'll just bring up the map really quickly. In the village of Barovia, I noticed that there's this one house kind of on the outskirts, on the edge of town, right up here in this corner, and that's where I put my old mage house, is right up here in this corner, which our characters can go meet. He kind of is obtuse, and he kind of avoids the villagers in town. The villagers think he's some kind of crazy old man living up in the house by himself. But actually, he's somebody of great value to our players. Now, let's talk a little bit about playing these two different types of characters. There are three ways in which you can play the elusive character. And this is going to depend on three things. Number one, it's going to depend on the party. What kind of party you have, the makeup of the party, the relationship that your party has. Number two, it's going to depend on the other NPCs that your players have run into. I mean, if the shopkeepers are kind of raising prices and being jerks, and if the barkeeper is a little gruff, and the town folk are really not that friendly, you're going to want to make your elusive NPCs really friendly. That kind of grandfatherly figure, their protectorate. He's going to be welcoming you into his home and offering you shelter and perhaps food and healing. If, on the other hand, that your players are running into really friendly NPCs, maybe the shopkeeper is really nice and has thrown in some freebies, or perhaps the bartender is overly helpful with some quest, then you want to make your elusive NPCs a little bit more recluse, a little bit more distant, a little harder to get information or harder to get stuff out of. Make them a little bit more difficult to interactive, just to create a change up in your scenario in your campaign with your characters. Now, I'm playing in Curse of Strahd, and Curse of Strahd is gloomy and dark and gothic, and my characters constantly run into characters that are aloof and not very friendly, and sometimes even hostile or foolish. And so my elusive NPCs are overly friendly. They're more helpful and endearing and protecting of our characters, and it's a refreshing experience for the players to run into somebody after they've been dealing with some numbskulls in the village of Barovia. Now, there is a third way in which you can play your elusive NPC, and that is kind of the crazy guy. He's maybe speaking in riddles, maybe he's talking in Yoda-ism, and this is a way to kind of inject some craziness into your campaign. Maybe he speaks in riddles and your players have to solve the riddles, or maybe he speaks in, third-party past tense in some weird way. And your characters really don't know what to make out of them. If you want to create a little bit of mystery and inject some mystery and some volatility into your campaign, play them like that. But remember, what's very important is these elusive NPCs aren't just there to add some flavor to your campaign, which they should. They're there to provide some needed help, whether it's lore, items, barter, trade, a safe place to stay, or some healing. That is why you've injected them into the game. I'm going to show you another one that I've done, and then I'm going to talk about how to inject these elusive NPCs into your game. The other one that I've talked about, which I've made an entire video about, are Gypsies. And let me just bring them up here. Gypsies are really interesting because you can think of Gypsies as a traveling camp. They're going to travel around. They're going to have merchants and fortune tellers and curses and everything you can imagine there. So they're like a roving city. So if you need to plop a city somewhere as your adventures are going from point A to point B, the Gypsies are awesome. Now, Wizards of the Coast have done a phenomenal job with the Gypsies. They're called the Vistani. If you don't have the Curse of Strahd campaign, or if you are familiar with it, the Vistani are the Gypsies in there, and they have all kinds of interesting things. Again, I've created a Theater of the Mind map. This background is provided by James RPG Art, which I'll put a link down in the background. And in this particular scenario, my elusive NPC, his name is Petra, and Petra is also a merchant. I got the background music going on here. Hold on for a second. Petra is also a merchant in which I'm using Loot Sheet. Let me just get the music fireplace going down there, campfire. Petra is a Vistani gypsy who lives with the gypsies, but he's a trader, and he's going to sell some stuff that's too expensive, but he might be willing to trade or have you go on a little side quest if you're really interested in that dagger +1 or that leather +1, or how about that ring of animal influence. I've created an entire video on the Vistani. I'll link that down below, and I think they're a great elusive NPC to add into your game. But let's talk about how to add them into your game and where to add them into your game. Now, the worst thing you can do as a dungeon master is pre-plan where your elusive NPC is going to be along that road or along somewhere in that village, because you don't know if your party is ever going to get there. So the first thing to never ever do is pre-plan where your elusive NPC is going to be. This is kind of held in your back pocket, and you're going to be able to introduce him into the campaign when you feel it's most appropriate. Maybe your character has just taken a shellacking. I mean, they're weak on health, you don't have a cleric in the party, and they're going to need a healer, and they're wandering down a road. They see a little smoke in the distance just off the edge of the road, and through the trees they notice a little hovel. And then crawling through the trees on a little path, they see an old kind of elven figure hovering over a barrel and mixing something. You've just introduced your elusive druid NPC to the party, who can now heal the party and offer them a safe place to stay. So determine when you want to introduce your elusive NPC to the party, whether they're lost and they're not able to solve the riddle of the Sphinx, to find the secret burial chamber. Well, the elusive NPC Magic Wiseman knows a lot about the history of the ancient Sphinx, and your characters have just wandered in and found this old ruin where the elusive wise man lives. So you're able to inject these in there to solve and help solve problems. Now, again, this is so much better than railroading your party to help solve them. You're providing unique NPCs that can provide healing, unique magic items, trade, side quest, or lore to help your characters. Another way, if you don't really need to introduce the elusive NPC, you can create a random encounter table and change that probability on that encounter table whenever you want to. Maybe you're rolling a 1d20 dice and you're going to go, well, if I roll a 1 or a 2, which is 10%, the elusive NPC shows up. And maybe it's going a little while and you're going to, well, I really want to introduce it. Maybe if I roll a 1 through 10, giving him a 50% chance of showing up. So you could just roll that d20 dice and change the probabilities whenever you want to have it a random occurrence if it's not necessary. So let's review really quickly. The elusive NPC is a character or characters, if you want to use the Gypsies, to introduce into your campaign to provide several things. Number 1, potential healing if needed. Number 2, potential side quests if players are getting bored or if you want to introduce a side quest into the story. Number 3, important lore in order to help solve problems that your characters need information in order to solve. Number 4, items, merchant, possible magic items, trade, a place to barter. Number 5, a place to rest. And number 6, to add some color into your campaign. I always suggest if you're using Foundry, don't use a battle map. Use one of the Theater of the Mind maps. I'll link down to the Theater of the Mind maps below. I'm also going to put in some information in the description of my two NPC characters, Celeborn, who is the druid, and the old wise man in the village. And feel free to watch my other videos, which I'll link below. But I also am running the Curse of Strahd campaign, Legends of Barovia, on Thursdays nights, 6 p.m. UTC +1. We're streaming live. Again, the first couple ones are a little rusty. I had some camera problems and some mic problems, and this is the first time I'm DMing with Foundry, and I'm learning a little bit as I go, and I'm sharing with you what I'm learning because I want myself to be a better DM, but hopefully some of these tips and advice can help you be a better DM. If you like this video, please click like on here. Don't forget to subscribe, click the bell so you can find out more information along with me. And please, in the descriptions below, I'd really, really love to hear about your unique elusive NPC. How did you introduce them? What side quests or items that you thought about it? I just thought, another elusive NPC that might be kind of interesting is like a priest or a cleric in some old temple or old church or religious place of some kind that can provide some some healing and maybe some clerical type spells. So please share with me your ideas. This is Parm King, the Dungeon Masters for Legends of Barovia. Until next time, thanks very much, and may all your rolls be criticals, just not critical ones. Otherwise, you're going to have to roll on the critical failure table, and that's never fun to do. It's entertaining for me, though.